Okay. This is the exact same table saw as that one. Actually, this one's a little bit more powerful. It has a little bit bigger motor than the table saw in the front. The reason it's a little bit bigger is because we're going to use what's called a stacked dado head cutter to cut out our dados. We need to cut grooves, these grooves out on this saw, and the way we're going to do it is by stacking several blades together. First thing I need to do is in the very front, there's an on-off switch. I need to flip that down so that the both lights are off. That way I know there's no way that this is going to turn on. Then we remove the throat plate. Move this out so you can see a little better. We got to find the wrenches. These wrenches are usually stored underneath over there. These just happen to be sitting up on the side. Then what I need to do is loosen the blades. You come over here and see down on this. So this goes on one side of the arbor. The closed end goes on the arbor nut. And I hold this one still with my left hand and I pull my right hand towards me. And that's going to loosen the bolt. Then I take the bolt off. And each one of these blades can come off individually. Be super careful when you take these blades off, because if you drop them on the table or the floor, the teeth are going to chip. I can see one or two that someone must have set it down on the steel table and broke it off. So be sure you don't set that down on the table of the table saw, that you set it down on either the plastic case for the dado blades or you set it down on the throat plate. So inside of here is going to be lots of different chippers. And we're missing some. I found them. They were set over there. These chippers, it should say on there somewhere how thick they are. But each chipper is generally 1/8 of an inch thick. There's almost always one chipper that's twice as thick. So if it's twice as thick as 1/8, what is it? A fourth. Important that these teeth face towards you. So whenever you're using a table saw, the teeth of the table saw face towards the operator or the infeed side of the table. So make sure these teeth face you. If you go to use the table saw and it makes a horrible loud noise, it probably means that your chipper blades are faced backwards. And it's kind of easy to do because both sides look sharp, but there's only one side that's got carbide on it. If each one of these blades is 1/8 of an inch, and I need to make a 3/4 inch wide dado, how many blades do I need? 6. However, one is 1/4 inch thick, so if we use the 1/4 inch thick one, I only need to use 5. So I start with the outside silver blade. So these outside blades are special. They're handed, meaning they have to go in the right order. There's printing or etching on one side of the blade. That is always the outside. On this particular set, there's a little recessed circle right here. That has to go in. The etching always goes out. So etching goes out, and then I start putting in these chipper blades, making sure that they face me. So that's 1/8, 2/8. This is the big thick one. 3/8, 4/8. 5/8 for the next chipper blade. And then the last outside, whoop, I put that one in backwards. And then the very last blade is the last 1/8 to get up to 6/8, which is 3/4. Now the hardest part in the whole process is getting the arbor nut back on. To get the arbor nut back on, you got to reach down here and twist it towards the outfeed side of the table. If you drop it, there's a dust chute down here, and you just have to open up the side of the saw and reach your arm down there and grab it. If you can't feel it there, look further down the line in the dust collection pipe to see if you can grab it there. To tighten this, it's just the opposite way of loosening. This goes back on here, and instead of pulling my right arm towards me, I push it away. And now you want to get it fairly snug, but you don't want to crank it on. If you guys have ever changed your oil on a car, you get your oil filter on until it touches, and then you go about 1/4 crank more to get it tight, and it's about the same thing here. You get it tight, and then you go about 1/4 turn, not even 1/4 turn, maybe 1/8 of a turn more to get it locked in there. I guess if you're going to make the mistake of having it too loose or too tight, it's better to go too tight. But remember, every time we turn this on, it tightens up a little bit more and a little bit more, so it gets real tight to get off. Last thing it's important to do is make sure that the teeth on all the chipper blades aren't on top of each other, but that they're in the gussets of the blade in front of it. So they line up like this, not like this. Does that make sense? And now you should be good to go. I always like to give it just a little wiggle, just to make sure that it's nice and tight, that nothing crazy is happening. What do you notice that's missing out of this? The guard. And what other piece? Splitter. You can't use a splitter with a dado because the dado doesn't cut all the way through the board. So we got to be a little bit careful about how we use this because it's easier to get a kickback when there's no splitter in. This black case can stay over here. Good night. And we're going to use this thing called a dado sled. The dado sled makes life a lot easier for us. I'll take this off, it just broke. With the dado sled, it goes in the tracks on the table saw. So you see we have these tracks right here. It's meant to go right inside of here and slide nicely. Now don't go too far because it'll fall off the table. I've not had that happen, but somebody's going to do it eventually. And I'm going to start with one side. Remember that check. I always like to double check that your full frame covers up your lines, especially if you're doing this on different days. Double check that. So I have to start with one side. And what I like to do is I've got my lines. I'm going to use a pencil and just transfer those lines to the edge. So now I can see them from the edge of my board. You see those little tick marks that I made? Pretty easy. And then this goes on the sled itself. I don't want to see the lines on the top. If I can see the lines on the top, I'm cutting the dados on the outside of the board. And now this is a little bit hard to see, but if you can imagine looking straight down on here, I'm going to line up those little tick marks that I made with the blade. Aha, but before I do that, I need to get the blade a 1/4 inch above. So dados are always a 1/4 inch deep. I'm going to use a scrap piece of wood. Is there a scrap piece of wood in one of those garbage cans I could use? Thank you. I'm going to use a scrap piece of wood just to double check that this is the right height. This is now your fence. So this big piece right here, I need to make sure that any piece of wood that I cut is tight up to this fence because this fence is perfectly perpendicular to the blade. So I turn it on. Well, I got to flip the main power back on. It's going to blink red and green, red and green, red and green. As soon as it goes solid green, it's ready to use. If it doesn't go solid green, double check your setup there. There's probably something that's not tight. So now I pull this on. So I'm just going a little bit. I want to see how deep it is. And I'm looking for it to be how deep? 1/4 inch. That's only 1/8, so I have to go a little bit deeper. That's looking pretty close to 1/4. Perfect. Now I got to take my board that I drew my lines on, line it up with the blades.